What is up, everyone? I hope you're doing fantastic today. This is Raphael Garcia here with Schwan on January 5th, 2020, for the first episode of the new year of the MMA Ratings Podcast. This is episode 226, and we are back for yet another year full of action. Schwan, how are you doing there, sir? Why don't you tell everybody how you were over the holidays and all that good stuff?
Not too bad. Just a bunch of family came over, so everybody seemed to like their presents. Everybody seemed to have a good time, so I can't complain. Just a lot of people in and out of the house or needing something or wanting something. So it was pretty busy as far as family stuff goes. Like alive and well, so they're alive and well. That's all that matters.
Well, I mean, family always know how to make themselves feel welcome and unwelcome at the same time. But we're not going to spend too much time talking about family.
I don't understand how they're that comfortable in somebody else's house. I'm not that comfortable in my parents' house, and I grew up in it.
Because it's not their house. Like that's the whole thing. Like I'm the same way. Even when I go to my parents' house, it's like it's time for me to go. I don't even stay there. Like it pisses my mom off so much that when I go home for the holidays, I get a hotel. Still to this day, and it pisses her off right up the wall. So I mean, It is what it is.
Yeah, when kids come with just take it all over. I'm like, oh, can I borrow your car? Well, you've already driving. You're calling me from the car, so I guess you can.
It's always something, man. But we have some stuff to talk about this week. We are going to be talking about the new year, some stuff we're looking forward to in mixed martial arts and boxing across all combat sports. We got a big fight to talk about with Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway being announced for UFC 272. But before we do that, as always, I want to thank you and everyone for the time. Is that my cat?
Oh no, it's mine.
Oh, my fault. I was like, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to this show. As always, you can find our podcasting and all of our content across multiple channels. We have MMARatings.net and .com, which are our flagships, and that's where everything really sits and stands to begin with. You can check us out on social media at MMA Ratings Net and MMA Ratings Net, on both Instagram and Twitter. You can check us out on Spotify, Radio Public, Google Podcasts, Breaker, and Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as well. MMA Ratings in all those spaces. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share all of our content there. You can hit me up at rgarcia_sports. Schwan Humes, you can find him at Black Jordan Breen. And that's that. Let's go ahead and jump into this fight that was announced maybe about 3 to 4 hours ago. Brett Okamoto over at ESPN broke the news that Alexander Volkanovski will be defending his title for the second time against Max Holloway. This will be their third fight, the rare trilogy in MMA. Schwan, what are some of your early thoughts about this fight when it goes down on March 5th at UFC 262? What are some of your early thoughts just looking at what was announced?
I don't really know that this fight has changed as far as like the actual issues that are posed for Max Holloway. I know he's had some good wins in between, but none of the guys he's faced have challenged him in the areas that Volkanovski can challenge him in. I know that's basically what it is. Everybody's saying, like, you'll see these fighters who will lose a fight and they'll win they'll win 7 fights in a row. And you're like, oh, they're on a hot streak. They're better now. It's going to be a better matchup. That only works if you've been facing guys who've been able to present you with similar challenges that the guy who beat you faced you with. Otherwise, all you're doing is beating up on guys who are oftentimes a caliber low beneath you as far as skills, physicality, or athletic talent. And I don't know how beating up on second and third tier fighters prepares you to beat up on the best of the best at the first tier fighter. And that's essentially what Max Holloway's done. He's beaten guys who either in the case of Kadar is a step behind him athletically and a step behind him technically, if not 2 steps. And then who else did he face? Oh, I forgot that guy's name. Yair Rodriguez, a guy who's a dynamic athlete, but a guy who ultimately is a step behind him as far as experience, balance of skills, and his own IQ. So it's like these guys offer threats in some areas, but they don't offer the complete threat that Alexander Volkanovski does. So when people tell me that it's going to be a whole different fight, I haven't seen anything from Max Holloway in either fight that he's won that tells me that this rematch with Volkanovski is going to be terribly different. Now, if he comes out to be a completely different fighter, okay, well then we might have a whole different fight here. But I'm going to say the same thing I've been saying about Max Holloway for the past 4 or 5 years. His style is predicated on him being able to take whatever you dish out and him being able to set a high pace and then ramp it up and build on it. Sure, he backs it up with technique. Sure, it's proper placement, all that nonsense, strategy. That's all well and good. But his success has always come. He can catch whatever you're pitching, and then he sets a high pace, takes a huge amount of punishment, makes an adjustment that's based on his ability to take the punishment, and then he ramps up the pace. That's how he's beaten the majority of guys he's beaten as an elite fighter. He's no longer able to do that. And since he can't do that, he's not able to just turn a corner and finish guys the way he used to. And that's what held him out against Volkanovski. He could never just bite down and walk through everything and drown him in volume because he never had the physicality to, and he didn't have the durability to. In the second fight, he made adjustments. But once Volkanovski realized what he was doing and Volkanovski adjusted to what he was doing, he didn't have his go-to, which is to bite down, take what he's got, and ramp up his volume and his pressure. He can't do that anymore. And from what I've seen in his last 2 fights, he still can't do that. So if he goes back in a time machine and that changes, we have a completely different matchup. But as it is, it's the same matchup it was the first fight. It's the same matchup it was the second fight. It's the same matchup in the third fight. The only question is the same question I've had for Max Holloway each and every year. What happens when that durability finally dips too far past the line? Because it's clearly not what it used to be. So what happens when it really crosses that line of no return? When that happens, Max Holloway, in my opinion, isn't an elite fighter anymore.
That's my big concern with Max. As much as I love him and what he's been doing in the game for so long, I just get concerned about how much damage he's taken over the years, because he's taken quite a bit. And every time I see him, even against Calvin Kattar and Yair Rodriguez, like you were saying, it's not like he walked out of those fights unscathed.
No, he got touched a lot, especially by Rodriguez. Rodriguez doesn't have that connective fighting style or whether stretch things together, but he was still landing big shots on him. That's why you saw Max Holloway all of a sudden wrestling him. I mean, when's the last time you see Max Holloway actively initiate grappling exchanges? Like that
Yair, he tried to against Yair when he tried to score some takedowns in there. But
against Yair. But when did he do that during his prime? After he already asserted himself on the feet. Never been a guy who's gone to grappling and grappling exchanges and takedowns and tie-ups. He's pressured guys, asserted himself on the feet, and then he might work on the ground. He's never been that kind of fighter. Whether he had the skills or not, he's never been that kind of fighter. So the fact that he's resulting to something, some people could say, oh, well, that's showing a new element of his game. I'd buy that. But my question is, if you would have shown that element 3 or 4 years ago, your trend would be closer to what it was 3 or 4 years ago. The reason you're making this adjustment is because you can no longer have that pace and that kind of physicality or a firefight against a certain caliber of opponent. Those days are no longer there. He can say he's fighting smarter, but he's not a dumb guy. Why wasn't he fighting smarter 3 or 4 years ago?
That's my thing.
Takedowns would have helped him against Dustin Poirier, but he said to get in a firefight. He's a smart guy. If he's really been growing, why didn't he do it then?
Yeah, that's very true. And it all kind of rolls back for me about how much damage is he going to be taking. Like, that's my big concern. Like, is he going to be taking more damage that's going to kind of escalate him or escalate him out of the cage? Like, that's kind of my big concern. He's still relatively young. I think he's only like 31 or something like that. And I know not that long ago, we were all really concerned about his health when he was on ESPN, still kind of slurring his words and having troubles communicating. So that's really my thought as I watch him head into this fight here. But at the same time, there isn't much else he could do right now. You can't have him continue beating up featherweight contenders, because he's going to do that. If you look at the rest of that division, outside of Brian Ortega, I mean, he's already beaten Brian Ortega. He might beat everyone else ranked in the top 15. And then you can't really move him to 155, because you have to wonder if he has the ability to still win fights the way he does at 145. I think he would be in a dangerous position fighting some of those bigger guys who would be able to really beat him up and kind of weather some of the storm that he throws. So I kind of feel like he and the UFC with him are in between a rock and a hard place when they had to book him into this fight.
he's basically John Fitched himself, or you could say Misha Tated himself, where you've lost to this person in decisive fashion. I guess to be more like Misha Tate, and then Misha Tate goes on this tremendous run, but it's like we've already seen you get stomped by Ronda twice. You have to do something incredible for us to give you a third fight. Luckily, Holly Holm knocked her off. So then Misha Tate gets moved right to the front because she's beat the hell out of everybody else. Max Holloway is going to keep on knocking these guys off, and at some point it's going to catch up to him. But he'll probably knock off another 3, 4, 5 challengers, and by the time he gets knocked off, the division's kind of in a tizzy because all the guys it'll get to the point where for you to fight Volkanovski, you got to beat Holloway. You can't beat Holloway. You're all the way to the back of the line. So eventually, even when he gets knocked off, the division's already lopsided and offset. I like Max Holloway. He's a smart fighter. He's a technical fighter. He's got great heart. He takes on the toughest challenges. But the only thing when I comment on the fight with Volkanovski is there's just a trend with him. He's never really adjusted mid-fight. His adjustment has always been to walk through fire and ramp up his volume. It's not like he hasn't been punished before by fighters. He's been punished by Jose Aldo. He was punished by Alex Volkanovski. Even when he fought Brian Ortega, everybody likes to highlight of how Brian Ortega couldn't defend his shots and couldn't counter them. But they keep forgetting that Brian Ortega was hitting him with a lot of big shots. Frankie Edgar actually landed his fair share of shots against him. Anthony Pettis was landing a lot of shots against him. And the only thing that saved Max Holloway isn't that he's so defensively slick and sound, is that he could take that punishment long enough for whatever technique he has to come break through. Because if you can't take punishment, you can't make an adjustment. Your technique will fail you. If I can't take what you're dishing out, it takes time for technique to work. So if I can't take what you're dishing out, my technique will never have the chance to work because I'm not a dynamic striker. I'm not a dynamic finisher. Max Holloway isn't either. He's not a big puncher. He's not a dynamic athlete. It takes time and it takes rounds for him to really assert control and break guys down. So if he needs time, but he can't catch like he used to, and he can't ramp up the volume like he used to, and he's not good at making in-game, in-fight adjustments, then my question is, how does he win this fight? I don't even know that Volkanovski is the best fighter or he's so dynamic or so great, but Volkanovski he used to be a big heavyweight rugby player. So he's got physicality, he's got durability, and he's got enough of a skill set across the board where you just can't take advantage of him. He doesn't give you the same easy openings that Brian Ortega does, that Frankie Edgar does, that Anthony Pettis does. And unlike Jose Aldo, he can fight at a pace. He can maintain a high pace all fight long and ramp it up, which is where Aldo falls off because he can only fight at pace for like a round and a half. The obvious holes that Max Holloway takes advantage of do not exist in this guy. You're not just going to take him down. You're not just going to hold him down. You're not just going to ground and pound him. You're not just going to box him up. You're not going to overwhelm with volume. You're not just going to bully him. It's got to be a combination of each and every one of those things. And I don't know, like I said, that Max Holloway has the durability to ramp up the volume. And he's shown historically he has no idea how to make adjustments in fights. If he knew how to make adjustments in fights, he would have beat Volkanovski the second time because he was up 2 rounds on him. But Volkanovski adjusted, and when he adjusted, Max Holloway had nothing else for him. He could not make any other adjustment to see if Volkanovski could catch up. He would have won one more round, fight's over. But he couldn't do it because at no point could he make an adjustment, and at no point could he bite down, walk through fire, and put something on Volkanovski to get him defensive or get him in bad positions. And he's going to need to do that to be able to win. So maybe he can pull it out for one night. Maybe, but that's a risky proposition. And lastly, he's not a dynamic enough guy where he can just explode into a spot and get you in a finishing position or punish you with a big shot. That's not the guy he is. He's not Jose Aldo power-wise, explosiveness-wise. He's not Brian Ortega finishing-wise. So it's going to take him time and rounds. And the more time Volkanovski has, the better he is going to be able to make the reads, make an adjustment, and then put the pressure on Max Holloway. And then it's going to come down to can Max Holloway for 1 or 2 rounds bite down and go all out like he used to. I don't think he can anymore. He hasn't in years.
2 points about this I want to kind of add before we move on to our next topic. The first one is, what happens if Max Holloway wins? Are they backing themselves into almost having to do a 4th fight between these two, especially if it's in controversial fashion?
Even if he's a dominant win, they have to get a rematch. Max got 2 shots at Volkanovski. Volkanovski is going to have to at least get 1. And then if Volkanovski loses the next one and he wins 2 fights, he's right back in there with Max Holloway again. This is a very treacherous position for the UFC because, they like Max Holloway, so if he wins, it's a win-win for them. But the division could be basically held up for at least another year. at least another year with this. This is, I mean, they're hoping. The UFC wins either way, but other people in the division lower, they've got to hope that Volkanovski just wins it, because at this rate, there's going to be a rematch. Even if he goes out there and knocks him out with the first shot, there's going to have to be a rematch. If there's a rematch, that means nobody's getting a title fight for at least 6 months to a year, maybe even 18 months, depending.
And you mentioned the rest of the rankings. That was my second question there, because if you look at the group, I mean, Brian Ortega, they've both beaten him. Yair Rodriguez, Holloway's beaten him. I'm not sure if either one of them have beaten Chen Jung, but he just lost to Yair. Then you have Calvin Kattar, who Holloway just beat. You have Giga Chikadze, who's fighting Calvin Kattar next weekend on the 15th, and he's someone who may be able to make a jump if he looks good and puts together a strong win, and maybe he's next in line if they could find some way. If Volkanovski picks up a win, they can kind of find a way to make that happen. But this division is getting really close to becoming really stagnant, looking at how this is really shaping up. I mean, you have Sodiq Yusuff fighting Alex Caceres in a few weeks, and that's really it. Dan Ige just lost. I don't think Bryce Mitchell was quite there yet. So this division is really in need of someone to break through rather quickly.
Well, it's been stagnant. That's why they're forced into this kind of rematch, because nobody else has A, been able to beat Max Holloway, or B, made enough of a case to leapfrog Max Holloway to a title fight against Volkanovski. And for all Volkanovski's dominance, all he's done is beat Max Holloway twice and beat Brian Ortega, who was crushingly dominated in a one-sided fight, dominated by Max Holloway. So, I mean, in what, the 2 years, I know there's been the pandemic and everything, but in the 2 years he's been champion, he's really only fought 2 opponents. He'll have defended the title twice. This will be the third time defending the title, but he's only fought 2 guys and 3 defenses. I mean, if it wasn't such a high-level fight, people wouldn't be clamoring for it. So that hardcore fans will be satisfied. Casuals like Max Holloway, so they're satisfied. But as far as generating new interest and growth and pushing forward the division, the people lower than them are so far behind them, nobody thinks they're even worthy of a shot. And even if whoever wins this fight is going to be favored against the entire field at 45. So there's no real interesting fights outside of this rematch. I think they were hoping that someone would knock Holloway off or someone would knock Volkanovski off, so we could have a kind of a rebirth and inject the division with life, but neither one of those things happened. So now we're getting the third match. And I know it's a good fight, but when you start getting into 3s and 4s, it starts to get a little ridiculous. So the best case scenario for the UFC is Volkanovski wins this and we're done with it. Because if it goes into a 4 fight, oh Lord, it's just a bad look for the division. It's just a bad look, and they're already getting outpaced by 135 welterweight in other divisions. They can't afford to take a step back as far as interesting matchups and interesting fights.
I definitely agree with you on that there. But this will be an interesting fight to see how it plays out.
It'll be a good fight, regardless.
March 5th, it will definitely be a good fight, and it's a fight that a lot of people still.
But make sure everybody keeps a close eye. If Max Holloway, if his chin goes past that line, it's going to get ugly, and it's going to get ugly fast. Mm-hmm. You can have an incredible chin. You can have incredible recuperative abilities. At some point, that runs out. And Max Holloway, much like Tony Ferguson, is a very skilled guy who chooses to break his opponents. He meets his opponents head on to break their will, and then he uses his skill set on them. That has a price. That has an expiration date. And you saw how badly when Tony went past his, he went from an elite guy to a guy who can't even compete anymore. So when it happens to Max Holloway, if it happens in this fight, it is going to be ugly. And I mean ugly.
I definitely agree with you there. So that's the really only big fight announcement we have to talk about today. I wanted to kind of look forward to the year of 2022. Schwan, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to from combat sports this year?
Combat sports in general, mixed martial arts.
Both. We talked everything here.
Well, for boxing, I'm looking forward to the Ugas Errol Spence fight. I know it's not the Crawford fight. Everybody wants to see Crawford versus Spence. I get that. But the fact of the matter is it is a title unification fight. So whoever wins this will be I think he'll be the unified champion if I'm correct on this. So in that regard, it's a very important fight. And people are crapping on a fight that under normal circumstances, everybody would be a big fan of because it's a unification fight. It's champions fighting champions. And just in this case, Ugas is not considered as good as Terrence Crawford, so people are basically shitting on the fight. But it's an interesting matchup because once again, Spence is coming off an injury. He had a retina injury. We don't know what state his eye is in. We don't know if he can really take punishment. We don't know if it really affects his performance. So that's one. And two, for the first time in a long time, most of the guys he's faced have been guys who, even if they could box a little bit, were kind of straight ahead or were available for him. Danny Garcia isn't defensively slick. He's a low volume counter puncher who sits on his counters and tries to get guys out of there with big counter shots. He doesn't throw volume. He's not hard to hit. Sean Porter is awkward. He's got some education, but a lot of his is physicality, volume, and his durability. Even against Kell Brook at the time was a long, athletic boxer puncher. Against Ugas, he's facing a guy who is athletic, who's awkward, but who's also a very good boxer and a very good defensive fighter. He's kind of got an awkward slickness to himself, and we've never really seen Errol Spence in a fight where a guy could match him as far as his boxing skills, and seen him face the guy who was not going to make himself available for counters or leads. So it'll be interesting to see how Errol Spence fights when he doesn't have a clear technical advantage as far as boxing. He'll still have his physicality. He'll still have his volume. But given that he did have a serious eye injury, we have no idea what's going to happen once he gets hit in the eye or if he gets hit a couple times in that eye. But even without that, it's an interesting matchup of brawn versus skill. And it'll be the first time I think he's facing a guy who's comparable to him athletically as well. So I'm very interested to see how he faces the combination of a guy who can box, a guy who's defensively responsible, and a guy who's got enough athleticism that he can't naturally just outpace him or just have his way with him physically. So that's going to be a very good fight. That's going to get dumped on because it's not Spence Crawford, but it's a very good fight, and it's a very good challenge for Spence coming off of a severe injury. He could have taken a tune-up. He's taking on another champion who just got done beating Manny Pacquiao and who many people thought beat Sean Porter a couple years ago.
What do you think will be the biggest boxing fight that we'll have this year?
Biggest one? Well, as far as skills and ability, I think they're trying to do Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor fight, and it's women's boxing. And I know that's not as big in America, but across the world, that's a very big fight. And it's essentially two of the finest technicians in boxing. If that fight actually ends up happening, it'll be a blockbuster event internationally. And it might be the most evenly matched fight as far as people with accomplishments, resumes as professionals, amateurs, and people who have pretty much top tier skill sets as far as amateur boxing and professional boxing. It might be the best skill, resume, and accomplishment fight in boxing. It might be the best one in the next 5 to 7 years. There's very few times when you have people with those type of resumes stepping in to fight each other when they're in or around their prime. For the women's side, it'd be something close to Floyd versus Manny. Let's say it happened about 2 years too late. If it happened 2 or 3 years before that, that'd be in my estimation, as far as women's boxing, that would be the closest approximation to it. I don't know if it ends up happening, but if it did happen, as far as quality boxing, quality skill, exciting fights, accomplishment, and resume and experience, that might be one of the best fights of the past 5 to 7 years in boxing.
Katie Taylor's undefeated, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I've been reading a lot about that potential fight. I don't know too much about Katie Taylor, to be honest, but I've heard her name a couple of times. She's a gold medalist too, right? She won in London, I think.
Yeah, she's really, the problem with women's boxing is the same problem MMA heavyweight and light heavyweight. At the top, it's very top heavy. Once you get to 3 to 5, the talent level kind of drops off. So the girls at the top are just light years better than everybody else. Amanda Serrano is light years better than everybody else. Katie Taylor, for the most part, is light years better than most everybody else. So you're kind of forced to kind of fight a high-level person. And once you get past that person, everything else, it can be tough stylistically or strategically, but actual as far as skill, accomplishment, and physical talent, the matchups aren't nearly as deep and as awkward as they are in the men's divisions, which has guys from 1 to 20 who could beat a guy from 1 to 20 at any given night. That's the difference. The depth of talent in the women's division is not as deep as the men's, which makes it easier to dominate. But when you are fighting the best, it makes it harder to win because there's really only 2 or 3 people on par with you. But when those people are on par with you, they are legitimately on par with you. Not on par, they're a champion, you're a champion. I mean, they are legitimately close to your equal in almost every possible category as far as skills, experience, ability to make adjustments, and IQ. But the rest of them are so far behind that you see a bunch of ultimately one-sided fights. But Katie Taylor is an elite fighter, as is Amanda Serrano. I know people think of her as Jake Little project, but she is literally one of the best top 10 boxers. And I mean, as far as her skill and what she's done in her area of boxing, she's probably a top 10 boxer. If you put everything equal, a top 10 boxer, be a man or woman in the world for at least the past 10 years. She's that good about it.
You mentioned Amanda. I want to bring up one other point about her before I give you some of my thoughts on what I'm looking forward to this year. I know you saw her kind of piggybacking off of Jake Paul's message about going into the UFC and fighting Valentina Shevchenko on the same card. I don't want to talk about her fighting Valentina. I think she would obviously get smoked in that contest there. But
no worse than Priscilla Cachoeira. No worse than Priscilla Cachoeira.
So that's what I was going to ask. Where do you see her ceiling from an MMA standpoint? I think she's 1-1-1 in MMA, maybe 1-1 or 1-0, something. I remember she had a draw. I know she's 1-1 as well. Where is her ceiling? And do you think she's really dedicating as much time to that space as she does with boxing?
I don't know. I mean, to be fair, it's kind of like the Carissa Shields thing. They are so far ahead of most people in their division that you could probably get away with training both of them. The problem is for you to compete at the elite level of MMA, it's like this competing at the elite level of boxing. You have to have a certain talent, and you also have a certain level of commitment. On the men's side, you look at Clay Collard. He competed in MMA. He was all right. He competed in boxing. He had a couple of upsets, but as he got further along in boxing, he started hitting his head, which also coincides with the fact that a couple months ago he had an MMA fight for PFL. Had a couple of them. So you have to imagine that affected his training and limited him to a degree. She's still a world-class athlete. She's a little bit older, so I don't think she's physically near her prime anymore. So I don't know that she could pick up all the nuances and intricacies because it's a lot to take on. But as I said, in women's mixed martial arts, the depth of talent, same thing in women's boxing, isn't as deep as the men's. That may sound sexist, but it's just a fact. It's just a fact. In certain divisions, you can get by with skill sets that you, in a men's division, you would never. In bantamweight women's division, some of the girls who are ranked could never get by with that skill set in men's bantamweight. It just wouldn't happen. I'm sorry. It's just a fact. So there's people she could beat. She would just have to dedicate her time to it. She's already world-class in striking. And I know it's just boxing, but the fact of the matter that entails footwork, hand speed, power, and certain defensive acumen that would translate over to mixed martial arts. So if she could be effective, there's enough girls. You could get her on a 5-fight win streak easily on regional MMA. I mean, we could get Hannah Cyphers like 8-0 or 7-0. You telling me we can't get Amanda Serrano to 8-0 or 7-0? We can't get her to 10-0? I would think if she really committed to herself, there's people in the UFC she could be right now. I mean, not right now. It's hard to take her like a year or two to really, really train. But given the gap they have as far as that skill set and how many of the female fighters aren't top-end athletes, there's people at the UFC she could beat if she really just keyed in on it for about another year or two. There just are. She's a better athlete. She's more experienced, and she actually has some knowledge and training, extensive training in grappling and MMA. It just would take her time to put everything together. But it's not as far a bridge for her to reach as it would be for Clarissa Shields or male MMA fighters who haven't immersed themselves to a certain degree in it. But she would just take time. But she could still do it. I mean, the gap in women's MMA isn't as bad as the gap in women's boxing, but it's still a gap. And she's still a world-class athlete, and she's still a world-class fighter. You could put wins together for her if you matched her correctly. And if matched correctly for a year or two, she could go with the UFC and she could put wins together.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm really interested in. Where's her ceiling in both spaces? And I'm going to throw it back to you in a second. But what I'm looking forward to the most in combat sports, specifically in mixed martial arts this year, directly within the UFC, is I'm interested in how fighters find the space to push back more when it comes to fighter pay. We see what's going down with Francis Ngannou right now. He is scheduled to fight Cyril Gane on the 21st, 22nd of this month, or whatever that is, for the UFC heavyweight title. And he has one fight left on his contract. If he loses the title, I think this is his last fight. If he wins, they push him into that mandatory kind of continue fighting as long as you're a champion. But I'm interested in seeing if this becomes a year where we see more fighters willing to push back against that, and what does that really look like?
I don't think I don't think he will. The only person I've known who actually talked and walked the walk, I don't know her, was Leslie Smith. Leslie Smith drew a line in the sand. They balked at the line. She got the hell out. Plain and simple. The fact of the matter is, it's like in a relationship. The person who has the power is the person who is willing to walk away. The UFC is willing to walk away from every single one of these cats because they'll just bring in someone else, stamp UFC behind their name, and instantly people will think that they're better than they are or they're elite. Because all you have to do is have UFC. The best fighters fight in the UFC. That's not true. There's some better fighters in Bellator. There's some better fighters in PFL. There's some better fighters in Risen. Not all the best fighters fight in the UFC. That is an actual fact. But everybody's so acclimated to the UFC, the three letters UFC, that people don't even they put it in a separate category from MMA. If you like MMA, I like UFC. Well, that's not the same thing. Liking MMA and liking the UFC is not the same thing at all. It's completely different. And the worst thing about it is the fighters always undercut themselves. And anybody who sticks up for them, they undercut them. I know you saw Jake Paul on the internet, his little thread against Dana, what he would agree to do. Instead of championing him, all the MMA fighters, you got Jorge Masvidal saying $5 million is an underpayment. I don't know what world he's living in. $5 million is not an underpayment. If it was, it's just not. First of all, they're making fun of his sales. Well, he only sold 65,000 pay-per-views. Let's have Jorge Masvidal without the UFC behind him. See how many pay-per-views he sells for a fight with any top guy. It's not cracking 100,000. Part of his selling aspect is him fighting in the UFC. Most of the guys in the UFC were in the top 10 couldn't sell 50,000 pay-per-views on their own. They couldn't sell 25,000 pay-per-views on their own. They'll be like, well, I sold this out. You didn't sell out anything else. You were either fighting Conor McGregor, you were either fighting Ronda Rousey, or you're riding the UFC's coattails. None of y'all can sell out anything on your own. Otherwise, the UFC will pay you more money. All the people who can sell on their own get paid very well by the UFC. Conor McGregor got paid because he can sell on his own. Ronda Rousey got paid because he can sell on his own. The rest of them, they're not getting paid because they can't sell on their own, and the UFC ain't paying them a dime worth more than they're contractually signed to get. That's how that works. But instead of rallying around somebody who's bringing attention to your paydays, they try to undercut Jake Paul. Well, he's not authentic. He doesn't really care about us. Who cares? There's a problem you need solved, and he's trying to bring attention to it. So instead of questioning his boxing acumen or his willingness to step into the cage or some nonsense, why don't you actually attack the issue, which is the pay? But nobody wants to do that because they don't want to get on Dana's bad side. So once again, as we've always said, they're going to lose 3 or 4, get kicked out of the UFC, and they're going to cry about I couldn't pay my bills. My wife was working 3 jobs. My kid needed this, and I couldn't get it for him. That's funny because for the 4 years you were on win streaks, we didn't hear nothing from you. Now that you're on a losing streak and they cut you, now you want to tell us about how unfair it was. Ask Junior Dos Santos. He was complaining about pay after the fact. Tim Sylvia keeps on complaining about pay after the fact. I don't know who else. Countless guys complain after the fact, but they don't complain when they're on top. And that's why when everybody's listening, they only complain after the fact. And after the fact, we don't care about you. Nobody cares. So it's like I would like to think they're going to turn a corner, but none of them are willing to walk away from this. None of them are willing to walk away from this. And the worst part about this is, you know how MMA guys, if you watch enough MMA interviews or countdowns, you'll hear every single one of them. And these are considered the alphas, right? The baddest, toughest guys in the world, right? Unstoppable. Nothing scares them. What did 90% of them say? I couldn't imagine working a 9-to-5 job. I'd rather do this. So a 9-to-5 job is too difficult for you. But if you were doing something, if you had a job and it didn't pay you health insurance, it couldn't pay for you to get to work, it couldn't pay for maintenance on your car, and it couldn't pay you to take care of your family, what would your family tell you? I don't care if you love it. You need to go find another job to take care of yourself. MMA fighters are telling us this job does not pay the bills because when they say you're taking food off I do this, put food on the table for my family, that's not true. Because there's managers at McDonald's who make more money at the end of the year than MMA fighters, a bunch of MMA fighters. Hell, there's people who are cashiers at McDonald's who make more than MMA fighters at the end of the year. So it's not putting food on your table. They have a dream of being the best. They have the dream of fighting the UFC. And even though that dream isn't financially soluble, they're going to keep on chasing it. For the rest of us who live in reality, we'd have to give up our dream and take care of our families or take care of ourselves. And I'm not saying it's not honorable. I'm not saying it's not admirable, but at a certain point, you have to understand what it is. You want to follow your dream? That's fine. Your dream comes at this cost. Don't complain to me about it because you don't have to fight. You don't have to fight. That's a choice. You are choosing to do this because you don't want to get a 9-to-5, because you're a warrior, because you have to have the taste of blood in your mouth. Yeah, that's all well and good. It's not true. You're doing this because you want to. You don't have to. You can literally get a job in multiple other places, make a good enough living, make more money than you're making now. You're choosing to do this. And you want me, they want me, and they want you, and they want fans to do the heavy lifting and speak out on their behalf. But none of them are speaking out on their own behalf because they're afraid of getting slapped down by Dana or the Fertittas or whoever owns it now. I don't think there's going to be a turn because none of these guys back each other up. None of these guys support each other. Every time someone gets sick, she's a coward. She's faking. She just wants more money. Every time somebody asks for more money, what do the other fighters say? You're ducking. You undercut your own people in your own spot every single day, and then you have the nerve to complain about fans and media who aren't fighting your battle for you. Fight it for yourself. Stop asking me to do it. Stop asking Raphael to do it. Stop asking fans to do it. Fight your own battle. If you want better pay, go out there and fight it, and you might have to be willing to walk away from your career and sacrifice so somebody 10 years down the line can benefit. But if you're not willing to walk away, don't complain about me not caring about you when you start losing and getting knocked out. That's your choice. You know the realities of combat sports, and you're choosing to invest in them anyways. I can't pay you. The fans can't pay you. The media can't pay you. The only one who can pay you is your boss. So either you figure out a way to get in his good side, or you walk away and build your own thing and get a career for your own self. But you can't complain after the fact. You can't get all the benefits and look down on everybody because you're a warrior and nobody can live in your world because you're an alpha, and then turn around and tell me, who by your standards isn't brave enough or tough enough to do this sport, I got to fight your battle for you. That's not how that works, dude. Some of us just have to give up our dreams because it doesn't pay the bills and it doesn't take care of things. Just because you're a fighter, you are not exempt from that. And I like fighters and I know fighters and I support them, but we got to be honest with it. If it's not paying the bills and you got kids, you got family, you got responsibilities, don't blame Dana. Go get a real job and pay your bills. I'm sorry. It sucks that you have to give up your dream, but a lot of people do. A lot of people do. You're not any better than any of them.
The part that I'm interested in, I'm wondering if more people start to stand up. Like that's the really only piece that I'm asking about, because I think that there's frequent rumblings and you hear people talking about it, but it doesn't necessarily seem to ever be enough kind of people speaking about it. So that's the first thing I'm interested in seeing.
Well, it never happens because those guys get paid. Remember when Jose Aldo was talking a lot?
Yeah.
A new contract.
I mean, Donald Cerrone
was talking a lot.
TJ Dillashaw, so many guys. TJ Dillashaw, Donald Cerrone. At one point,
they sign a new contract, and what happens? What happens when they sign a new contract?
They all shut up.
That's ultimately it. The NBA, NFL, they might hate other players. I hate that guy, but they understand the prices it gets paid to get to that level. They still want that guy to get paid. They might hate him. They might want to dominate him and embarrass him, but they still want him to get paid. MMA fighters do not care about the other guys. They don't care about Conor McGregor. Conor doesn't care about them. If he did, he could stand up. GSP could stand up, but nobody stands up. Once they get paid, they fall in line. And when they're not getting paid, they don't say nothing because they hope to get paid. Then when they find out they're not, then it's like, well, I didn't have health insurance. I've got this damage.
So what's the next item you're thinking about, Schwan? We're going to do 2 each. So what's the next one that you're looking forward to for 2022?
Let me think. That is really tough. Man, what am I thinking? I think maybe I'm really interested to see how this Ngannou and Gagne fight goes, just because of, as we talked about, fighter pay issues. Because if Francis Ngannou wins and he maintains that title, yeah, he's got to stay with the UFC. But now you have an active champion who seems to be speaking out, and if he continues to speak out, that'd be very interesting, because it's clearly UFC are tired of him. They're trying to leverage Gagne into a position where they can move forward with him. So it'll be interesting to see how they scramble to adjust to that. But also it's a very interesting matchup in the heavyweight division, because the heavyweight division very rarely has matchups where we can't predict where it's going to happen, because the fights are fairly one-dimensional. So it's interesting to see two dangerous heavyweights in each other who people really have a reason to believe could beat one another, whether it's just based off power and the chance of Ngannou or far superior skill and craft and the chance of Cyril Gane. So for once again, and we usually get a matchup like this, every 2 or 3 years in heavyweight, maybe 4 or 5 years, we have an interesting, intriguing, highly marketable heavyweight match, which isn't very common in mixed martial arts.
Who do you think is going to win that heavyweight fight? We're going to talk about it as it gets closer, but just first thoughts, who do you think is going to win?
I like to say Cyril, but he hasn't faced any adversity, dude. I have a hard time picking guys who haven't faced any adversity. Because I don't know what happens if you twist your ankle, you break your toe, the guy clips you with a shot you're not ready for. At least I know Ngannou, for all the things about him, he might be limited, he might be a front runner to a degree, but at least I know when it gets rough, he will still fight, he won't quit, even if you're dragging him and beating the hell out of him for 5 rounds. I have no idea what Cyril Gane does once the fight gets tough. No idea, because he hasn't faced 1 ounce of resistance in the UFC. He's had it his way completely. I don't know what happens if somebody starts touching him to the body, or someone clips him with a short left hook or a big right hand, or kicks him in the leg and his leg goes numb, or he twists his ankle or his knee. I don't know who he'll fight through. I would assume he would, but I've got no proof that says that he'll fight through any adversity at all. So I have to initially lean on the person who's had to get through adversity, who's had to make adjustments, who's had to claw his way back up. Cyril's had it all his way, and I just can't back up a guy who's had it his way completely. I just can't do it.
Understood there, sir. Understood. So my second thing that I'm looking forward to this year is I want to see what happens with the women's divisions in the UFC. It's funny, I was listening to, I think it was today, or maybe what's today? Today's Wednesday or Monday, listening to the Luke Thomas show on Morning Combat with him and Brian Campbell. And they brought up an interesting stat that there's only been one event that has been headlined by a women's fight each year since, I think, 2018, which surprised me, but didn't surprise me at the same time. So I'm wondering if we see a situation this year where there's maybe 2 events that are headlined by women, or if they continue to kind of stay in the relegated position that they're in, because UFC will almost try to bookend any type of men's title fight into a card rather than put the women in the main event picture, which is what we've seen pretty consistently over time. So I'm wondering if that's something that we see maybe begin to slightly shift. There hasn't really been any push for it to shift, but if that's something that gets highlighted and we see maybe Valentina headline 2 shows, Amanda Nunez versus Kayla Harrison maybe headline a show or something along those lines.
I mean, it could happen. I don't think the UFC is nearly as sexist as everybody tends to make it out to be. It's like they have good fighters. Once again, the divisions aren't very deep. And once again, for the most fight, I mean, let's look at Juliana Pena versus Nunez. Nobody considered that to be a fight because of how Juliana's performed against ultimately inferior opposition previously to fighting Amanda Nunez. People completely ignored flaws, holes, limitations, because Pena lost to this girl and this girl who's not half as good as Nunez. They completely ignored the matchup because most women's fights don't get combed through the way that most men's fights. When you see men's fight, you see a million different breakdowns by every website over the same freaking fights, whether it's the top of the card or it's the bottom. How often do you really see in-depth, insightful, strategical, technical, conceptual, historical breakdowns of women fights in mixed martial arts? I know I used to do them a lot, and I do them on the show, and I write articles about them. I don't know a lot of guys who really spend a lot of time on them. They give little passing breakdowns, little passing assessments when they're breaking them down over shows. They don't really dig into them, and they don't generate enough interest. The matchups often are not interesting enough, and the only reason that we'll know that Pena and Nunez will get another headlining spot, because if Nunez beat Pena, I don't know that she'd get another headlining spot. But since Pena beat her, this is the rematch to the biggest upset of all time. So of course that's going to get moved forward to a headlining position. Most of the fights are fights that are easily predicted, or they're fights that the fighters do not have a big enough fan base that would demand enough of attention be drawn to them. So that's why I don't think it's going to happen. I I don't think it's a matter of sexism. I think it just comes down to capitalism. Most of these girls in and of themselves have not shown an ability to draw. And like most fighters, they only want to fight. They don't want to talk. They don't want to do interviews. They don't want to appear on every single podcast and every single show. They just want to do their job and have that be enough. And that's never been enough. The only person, Nunez, is getting the rub because she's gotten to fight every big name in women's mixed martial arts, and she's beaten them for the most part. That's the only reason she got her position. Ronda Rousey got hers because Ronda Rousey had proven in and of herself, outside the UFC, she could draw, she could become a crossover star, she could get lots of attention. Nobody else in the UFC so far has shown that they demand that sort of attention. Even the best fighters don't have those raucous fan bases. And even the fighters who are popular really aren't that popular in comparison to some of their male counterparts. If they were, you'd see a lot more women skipping the line, getting title shots they don't deserve, or being put in eliminators they don't deserve. But because it doesn't make sense financially, that's why it's not happening. And I haven't seen anybody who's come in the UFC recently with a big enough fan base. I've seen girls with skills, but I haven't seen anybody with a big enough fan base that tells me that that's going to change anytime in the near future. In fact, if Amanda Serrano came in and fought Valentina Shevchenko, that could headline a UFC card. That would be a big event, but it wouldn't be an event involving one of the fighters on their roster. Nobody generates that kind of interest.
Sir, I'm going to have to agree with you once again. We are running a short show today because there isn't really much to talk about. I saw somebody say that this is the off season of combat sports. So Schwan, how did you spend your off season of combat sports? We haven't had any fights over the last 2-3 weeks now. We won't have one until next weekend. So how are you spending your time, man?
On my time, one thing I do, I train kids basketball, so I spent more time doing that. I spent a lot of time doing that. And outside of the family stuff, the main thing I did on my time is if you follow me on Twitter, you know I just start dropping tips for fighters, the stuff that they don't know, professional fighters who don't know common things about fighting. It's ridiculous. They say I'm not a fighter, so you don't know, but there's basic things that you don't know that people who actively fight don't know. So I just drop hints and give lists of things that fighters should work on so they can progress better, or things they should look forward in their coaches or the training camp so that they can progress in their careers instead of plateauing and being the same fighter 4 years from now that they were when they first got into the UFC, Bellator, or whatever else. That's what I do because I deal with a lot of fighters and I deal with a lot of athletes, either in basketball or either in combat sports. That's my downtime.
That's your downtime. See, my downtime has been a whole bunch of traveling. I was in Mexico for New Year's, which was pretty awesome. I almost got stuck there, but thankfully I did not. I got back in time.
Had the private jet come through?
I'll say it again.
Had the private jet come through?
Man, look, it almost got to that point because the rebooking that the American tried to put me through Sunday night into Monday morning was not going to be fun. But I got right back. I got back right before the snowstorm hit up here, so I made it home safely. But I'm just trying to enjoy my downtime, man, just because after next week, it picks right back up. We have 2 UFC cards back to back. I think we have one that first weekend of February. So, we're going to hit the ground running. We're going to have a lot of work to do this year. But MMA Ratings, the podcast, will be here all year to stick with giving you the show that we've been giving you for the last 225 episodes. So, again, as always, thank you. Go on. You said you had something to add, didn't you? Go ahead.
Yes. 2 things. 1, MMA fighters who complain about boxers not coming over to mixed martial arts, you have to understand, y'all complain about the money in mixed martial arts. So how are you going to convince a boxer to come over? I know the logic MMA fighters say is if we're in the UFC, Dana White will pay big money for that boxer to come over. But once again, whether it's in boxing or it's in mixed martial arts, the money is focused purely on the boxer. If Kamaru Usman and Canelo fought in the cage, Usman could probably make $5, $6, $7, $10 million. But that money would all be predicated on Canelo coming over. It's not based on anything Usman's done, because as big in a star as Usman is in the MMA world, he's not really a big crossover star like Canelo is. So why would Canelo make that risk going to mixed martial arts? Sure, he can make tons of money, but he could still make 25, 30 million and just box you. So I understand what MMA fighters are saying. I'm upset. It's not fair. They don't have the courage. I actually think that boxers have more respect for mixed martial arts than mixed martial arts have for boxing. I've been in gyms. I've been around fighters. Every single fighter thinks they're nice with their hands. Every single fighter thinks they can box. They actually downplay what a skill boxing is. Well, all you have to do is defend with your hands. Yet every time you'll go in against a world-class guy, y'all can't seem to do it. It's just the disrespect for boxing, and I understand it's not the favorite sport. I understand there's politics, but the art of boxing is a very serious art, and no other art that's part of mixed martial arts gets dissed as much as boxing. People don't go challenging Roger Gracie for grappling. People don't just go against the best Thai fighter in the world and say, let me go fight that guy. Why? Because they respect those arts, and because those arts aren't going to get them paid the way it would to have you fight the name guy in boxing. So I get tired of that argument that they're afraid of us. They're not afraid. It just doesn't make any sense. If I'm making $25 million to do my specialty, why am I going to go over $25 million to do something I have no concept of and no real skill or experience in? What sense does that make? Especially when I'm the money. Floyd Mayweather was the money, not Conor. Canelo's the money, not Kamaru Usman. And I just wish MMA fighters would just be more respectful of boxers, because I don't hear boxers bashing MMA fighters. I hear MMA fighters bashing boxers all the time. Boxers say, I couldn't survive in a cage. But every MMA fighter says, I could go a couple rounds with De La Hoya, I could go a couple rounds with Floyd. And they get respected for basically being outclassed and beat up by world-class boxers. If you're a boxer, you come in MMA, you don't get any respect for getting choked out. You get laughed at. You get laughed at, and your earning potential is hurt from that point on. Conor's earning potential wasn't hurt by fighting Floyd. It went up. It went up. Tyron Woodley had the biggest paydays of his life boxing, not in mixed martial arts. His value went up. That's why that happens. And secondly, this is more of a functional thing for fighters. Y'all need to start having, I don't care what level you are, but especially if you're not a top level fighter, you need to start having your coach or some coach pay attention exclusively to when you are sparring. I know y'all are at these big camps and you want to aspire to get to a certain level, but the problem is a lot of fighters are not, they're making repeated errors in their sparring that aren't being caught, and those errors are costing them wins and costing them damage that is unnecessary for them to be absorbing, because someone is not carefully going through their sparring footage, breaking things down and pointing things out. And they think because they're with a big camp and so-and-so's in their corner, that doesn't do you any good unless that person is specifically paid for and focused on what you were doing exclusively, and they are really invested in you. And a lot of big camps, those guys are split between you and bigger fighters. When they have a bigger fighter, you get put to the back. You get put in the rear seat. And when you're trying to come up as a fighter, you can't afford tremendous mistakes or missteps. You have to be on it 100%. So I'm going to say a lot of MMA fighters need to invest in themselves, because if you want to get better, every other sport understands this. Boxers understand this, basketball players, soccer players, baseball players, football players, they all have individual coaches. They all have people who break them down outside of their team, and they focus on their skill building, and they focus on how to make adjustments and how to pick up the flaws in their game. More MMA fighters need to make that investment in themselves, and you'll see a tremendous growth as far as the technical growth, the conceptual understanding, and the strategic game plans people have. Because too often guys come in making this mistake in the year 2014 when they got in the UFC, and 5 years later, 2019, they're still the same fighter. How is that happening if you are paying a coach to help you get better and you were getting to spar with the best fighters in the world? How are you the same fighter making the same mistakes? You didn't jab your way in and out when you first got into the UFC, and 5 years later, you still don't jab your way in and jab your way out, except now you're a step slower and you're getting knocked out left and right. The time to work on your skills and to invest in film work and invest in outside coaching is not once you lost your fastball or once your chin is gone. Too fucking late then. The time for you to invest in yourself is early, so you can extend your career and extend your prime and extend your time. If you get to be a world-class fighter, you can extend it instead of being world-class for 2 years and then falling off the face of the earth 2 years later because you don't have any skills to back up that athleticism. That's just the tip I have for most MMA fighters. And there's lots of guys on Twitter. There's Conor Rebush. There's me. There's a lot of people you can go to. But if you don't want to make the investment, then you're basically saying, I'm okay being at the level I'm at, and I don't want to be world-class. And if I am world-class, I don't plan on having a long stay there. The best fighters, the best athletes, the best ball players all do the work with their team, and they do a bunch of work on their own. If you're not doing both things, you're not as serious as you think you are. You don't want to be as great as you think you want to be great, and you will not be on the top for as long as you think you will be. These are just facts. You either do the work and make the investment, or you just have your moment, and then fall off a cliff like the other 87% of fighters who go to the UFC, Bellator, or Risen, who go on little win streaks, and then you never hear from them again. It's your choice, but y'all really need to start investing in yourselves, because I watch a fight, I can watch sparring sessions and figure out things right away. I watch fights, and people are like, how'd you know that was going to happen? Because I pay attention to habits, and you have the same habits you had 6 years ago, except now you're a worse athlete and you can't take a punch. What did you think was going to happen? There, I'm off my soapbox.
Sir, you are always welcome to get on your soapbox here. But as I was saying, we should have a good year put in front of us. This is a 2020. This is a new year here, and we are always going to be doing the work. So please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our content wherever you may see it. You can always catch us at MMA Ratingsnet and .com. Check us out at MMA Ratingsnet on Instagram and Twitter. I'm R_Garcia_sports, and Schwan Hughes is Black Jordan Green.
Otherwise known as Hoodie Schwan. There's Hoodie Mello for basketball, Hoodie Hughes for MMA.
I wasn't gonna make the association. I'm not even gonna touch that. I'll touch that one next week. But we'll be back next week. So as always, thank you everyone for taking the time to check us out. Everyone have a great day. Stay safe out there in these streets, and wear your mask, and Black Lives Matter. Have a good night, everybody.
Take it easy, guys.